Today we want to talk about sustainability in real estate. And this topic on sustainability, we have 5 sections. We want to talk about the current state of the practice, and then we want to talk about sustainability rating tool, and then we'll talk about the cost and the benefit of going green, going through this practice. And also we want to talk about why being green cannot be easier, and particularly on the residential real estate segment. And then we want to have a mini case about one of the very large real estate company. It's an equity office in Manhattan. And let's take a look what kind of thing that they are doing right now. And let's move on to the first section, sustainable real estate. And this particular issue is trying to address the impact of this entire built environment at the site, neighborhood, and the global level. And at the site, it just means that on this particular lot, this property, neighborhood is a nearby surrounding area and the impact onto the neighbors. And at global level, we're talking about the use of energy, CO2 emission, etc. And the main issue for sustainability are focusing on one, energy efficiency. Energy efficiency is by far probably the most important issue for a property investor. The reason being that the use of energy is very costly when we run the property. And for the operating expenditure, often the case that close to a third or even a half of operating expenditure tied to the use of the energy and the natural resources. So if a property owner and investor would be able to reduce the use of the energy and the natural resources, then that investor would be able to reduce operating expenditure, would be able to improve net operating income, would be in turn to improve property value. So this is a very important thing for a modern property operator and investor. And then the second issue would be how easy it is for the property resident to use the nearby local public transportation, such that the CO2 and the use of private of the car's vehicle can be reduced. And this kind of public transportation, not just about metro, not just about buses, and we're also talking about the access to biking trail, etc. Okay, those are all kind of transportation mode would be able to reduce the use of the fossil fuel. And also about healthy indoor environment, the air quality, and to what extent that the user, the tenant, would be able to stay healthy condition. And the reuse of material, and so to what extent that we use those construction materials that are being recycled, etc. And building preservation and reuse, that would be the smart growth thing, particularly in the inner city, instead of keep on building up and then take away those agricultural land and build into the suburban or the rural area. And water efficiency also is something that in recent years have been on the radar. Particularly to the west of the United States, the west coast of the United States, like California, Arizona, Nevada, etc. That's a part of the United States where the water resources is particularly important. So that's a kind of the sustainability issue important there. And also the stormwater management. Stormwater traditionally have been going to the underground stormwater system provided by the city, but as more and more of the development in some of the city, those stormwater system have been running at 100% capacity or even above 100% capacity. So often leading to the pollution into river, to the lake, or even flooding situation. So those are kind of main issue relating to sustainability that property owner investor will need to address. Next slide. And regulations are coming. Regulations are coming. Many local government like New York, Chicago, Boston, San Francisco, Los Angeles, they all require the disclosure of the use of energy, water, CO2 emission by those major commercial property owner. So nowadays we have this kind of reporting requirement in many cities. And many other cities also incorporate the green standard into their building code. For commercial building of a certain size, maybe their building would be required to certify by one particular green tool at certain level, or certain kind of a green feature would be built into their building code. And required, for example, in Chicago, the green roof. That would be the growing some plant and vegetable on top of the tall building. That is quite commonplace in the city of Chicago. So different cities doing a different way, but they all trying to ensure that each city meet certain kind of sustainable criteria that the city have set for themselves. Next slide. And the disclosure of the sustainability in many cities is called local benchmarking. And for example, New York City. New York City say that they mandate fossil fuel caps for all the building over 25,000 square feet. And they require commercial building of a certain size to report their energy use intensity, CO2 emission, the use of the water, etc. So those are kind of the green performance that have been tracked by the city, and the city have been as time goes by, increase those sustainability standard for those buildings. Those buildings, as time goes by, will need to meet certain kind of performance threshold. Okay, next slide. And that's called local benchmarking. And we have tremendous amount of pressure because we live in a world that we cannot do everything. And we have neighbors. The neighbor may not be happy about our green performance. So some sort of the green standard criterion have been put into local regulation. And for example, the water situation in the state of California leading to the new regulations such as the cash for grass. Cash for grass means that maybe initially in your front yard, backyard, initially you have a grass. The city would say that if you turn those grass, okay, those are water-thirsty kind of a thing, turn into some sort of the landscape without any kind of grass. For example, being covered by stone. Then the city will pay you for doing something like that. Okay, so those are the kind of regulations are coming up relating to the sustainability in terms of not using too much of fossil fuel, not use too much of the water, those kind of precious natural resources. Next slide. So here we have a news article from the state of California, and right now is that the new home and the new development could not be undertaken unless those developers in California meet the landscaping requirement that mandate the drought-resistant plants and recycle water for irrigation. So those are the kind of of course different city, they may do it in a slightly different way, but that's a trend in the state of California because the population is growing and they just don't have enough water for those beautiful glass. So the home nowadays, for example, in the second bullet point, you say that the home built in California in the last 10 years are 50% more water efficient than those older homes. So that's a obviously substantial improvement. Next slide. And for business people, and a lot of corporations focus a lot on sustainability nowadays. And the reason is that if you do not pay enough attention to sustainability, you keep on using a lot of electricity, keep on using a lot of water, you create a lot of exposure. And this exposure are the uncertainty about the cost that you will need to pay down the road for the use of energy and the use of water, etc. And of course, the more you use those natural resources, that the greater the amount of exposure would be. So if you are really serious about reducing those business risks, then the most efficient way is to not to use them or use them very, very little. Therefore, the price change in the future will not impact your bottom line that much. So here we're talking about sustainability is related to the notion of the risk management and holding out the factor constant. Business people will not want to bear risk without any additional compensation. That's the reason why they try to reduce this type of exposure. Next slide. And we have numerous surveys, and the one I list is a larger survey. And it showed that a lot of corporate CEO, CFO, they would really start to pay attention to sustainability. But if you ask them what kind of the initiative that they wanted to adopt, the majority of them would tell you that they first want to deal with their corporate real estate. That would be the property owned by the corporation. They want to make sure that the property they own, the property they lease, are to some degree have good green performance. Okay, and for a reason why they all tend to focus on real estate when they talk about sustainability. It turns out that, so let's go to slide number 11 first. Okay, slide number 11, the impact of the built environment. In this slide, it says that the building account for 40% of U.S. energy consumption. Building consume more energy, burn more fossil fuel than transportation, than car combined together. And building account for about 68% of U.S. electricity consumption. So more than 2/3 of the electricity go to the built environment. And building account for 38%, almost 40% of the CO2 emissions. So if you worry about global warming, the first thing you want to take care is a building, not transportation. And of course, the majority of people, when they talk about try to not to use the fossil fuel, they always think about cutting down on transportation, not driving a large full-size SUV, etc. But it turns out that the kind of saving from transportation is relatively small compared with the kind of saving that we'll be able to achieve if we really pay attention to the use of energy and natural resources associated with our building. Building is the way to go if you're really serious about global warming. The numbers show that that would be the case. Let's go back to the previous slide. That'll be slide number 10. Because the importance of the sustainability in the building sector, and so we have seen the rise of eco-label building. Okay. And the most important green certification tool in the United States, we have two of them. One is LEED, one is Energy Star. The LEED is Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. Okay, right now it's about 6% to 8% of the new commercial building has been certified, but that number is increasing. because more than half of the registered new construction nowadays try to shoot for some sort of level of the LEED certification. So the market share will continue to go up, although at this time being, the market share is less than 10%. Okay. Let's go to slide number 12. So in addition to LEED, we also have the Energy Star. And Energy Star is slightly different from the LEED in the sense that Energy Star is mainly focusing on the use of energy, while the LEED is more focusing on the design of the building along a different major category. Or later we'll talk about what does it mean by a LEED building. But for Energy Star, basically, it's just basically focusing on the use of energy. So we have two different types of the major rating tool. One is LEED, one is Energy Star. Next slide. The LEED certification is based on score in a number of the category. Those major categories include location, water efficiency, energy and atmosphere, material and resources, indoor environmental quality, and innovation and design processes. So let's take a look at location. Let's assume that you have a building. This building is located nearby a bus station, for example. Then you earn some point because of the location. Encourage the tenant to use the public transportation, therefore the amount of CO2 that we burn could be reduced. Okay, so location is where the location is sustainable location and has the implication on the point that you will be able to earn for this particular building. And the second one is water efficiency. And for those buildings in California, okay, they allocate more point to water efficiency. For the building in New England, and we have a fewer point that have been allocated to water efficiency. So those different categories have different point, depends on the different region, their need toward sustainability. And the third one is energy. Energy is by far the thing that almost every developer will pay attention to, because energy has direct implication on the operating expenses. So energy, and so the less amount of energy that you use, and if you will be able to use the energy that generated on site through the solar panel, etc., then you earn quite a lot of points that way. And then the material resources depends on where, for example, whether the construction materials are locally sourced. If we have a locally sourced construction material, that means that the transportation of those construction material will involve a lesser amount of the CO2 used. And that is green to the overall environment. So if you use a locally sourced material, if the construction materials are recycled material, then you earn point that way. And indoor environmental quality, that involving whether you have a naturally sunlight coming to the buildings itself. It would also based on the air quality circulating within the building. And those features also count towards some point. LEED certification is largely based on design and construction. So during the construction and the design phase, they submit this request application, and then there will be auditing process when the building is done, and then this certification will be provided. Okay, and it's not really has to do with the ongoing operation after the building is completed. So if the building is a green building, then this green building certification is kind of forever. It will last there. And there are 4 levels of the certification. One is certified, that's the lowest level, go up by silver, gold, platinum. Okay, it depends on how many points that you earn. Next slide. Energy Star is different from the LEED. The LEED is based on construction and design. It's based on how many points that you earn from each of those 6 major categories. Energy Star is largely based on the energy that you use in this building. And then you compare with your peer. That would be, let's say that a hotel building in Manhattan would be compared with all the other hotel buildings in Manhattan. It will not be compared to an office building in Florida, for example. So among your peer building, then they do the ranking on the energy use intensity. The top 25%, okay, the top 25% building will be qualified for Energy Star if the building owner are willing to apply for this particular certification. So it's a relatively ranking, it's not an absolute ranking. It's not like, okay, out of 100 points, if I earn 95 points, I earn this particular certification. That's absolute criterion. Here is not. Here we're talking about that is a moving target, depends on your relative ranking with your peers building. Energy Stars compared with the LEED is relatively easy target, and because a lot of buildings are pretty thirsty in terms of the use of energy. They haven't done really a good job. The majority of buildings are not really doing a good job in terms of conserving the use of energy. So if a building decides to want to be certified by Energy Star, usually it doesn't take too much of an effort. Then they can see the improvement, and they can see the improvement in the ranking, and then have the building to be certified as Energy Star. So there are plenty of Energy Stars buildings out there, pretty mildly. Okay, it's not that difficult to have the building to be certified as an Energy Star, but it does take more effort to have a building to be certified by the LEED. Next slide. Let's take a look at the differences. Okay, the average difference in terms of the LEED building and the Energy Star building. LEED building tend to be smaller building and shorter building, younger building, and usually they tend to locate it outside of the CBD. So they are more in a suburban location and outskirts of the metropolitan city. So for the city of Boston, we're talking about many office building, industrial park building around I-95. You will be able to find quite a lot of those certified LEED building, but we don't see too many of the LEED certified building inside the downtown Boston. Okay. Excuse me. I need a little bit of water. On the other hand, Energy Star, they tend to be larger building, taller building, older building, and tend to locate in major metropolitan market in the downtown, uptown area. Think of those high-rise office building in Manhattan. Okay, they are more of the kind of Energy Star kind of building. Okay, so very high-rise, 30, 40, 50 stories, and their building can be quite old, have been built, say, 30, 50 years ago. So those are the kind of usual difference between the LEED certified building and the Energy Star certified building. Okay, so Let's talk about the cost of the LEED certification. And there are two types of incremental cost if you want to have the building certified by the LEED. One is a so-called hard cost. The other one is a so-called soft cost. The hard cost involving the additional cost associated with the physical aspect of the structure. For example, the use of the energy saving of the material, energy saving machinery for the building, etc. Those tend to be a little bit more costly. So we're talking about that it could be somewhere around 1%, 2%, all the way to 5% cost overrun. Depends on which level of certification that you want to shoot for. And the soft cost is about the design. You require additional design. You require more of coordination among those professionals. So they will need to spend more time to go through the design and coordination. So usually we're talking about the soft cost, which goes up by about 1%. And so the median total cost for a LEED certification building usually about 3% more. Okay, a little bit more costly. But if you ask developer, they tend to give you an estimate that is much greater than 3%, because a lot of developers they are not really interested about building a LEED certified building. They have never done this before. They thought that would be much costly. So if you ask them, they tend to give you a much higher number. But if you actually look into those buildings that have been certified, actually the additional cost is relatively moderate. Next slide. And how about for Energy Start? Okay, the incremental cost is only about a half of the LEED. It's about 1% to 1.5%. And usually the Energy Start certification would be achieved by doing two things. One, appropriate lighting design. Okay, usually for the majority of space that the lighting design is that we tend to use too much of the light. We tend to overlift. So if you bring in this professional, usually is that we don't need this much of the light. And sometimes we change the paint, okay, using those paint that will not absorb that much of the light. So we can reduce the amount of the lighting, and that will save a lot of energy. Another thing is building commissioning, and here we're talking about that maybe there are some sort of maintenance that have not been performed in the past, and such that right now we are operating the building at a very energy intensive fashion. So we improve those machinery. For example, the AC, those kind of things we have optimized those systems. Then we'll be able to reduce a lot of use of energy. And by doing these two things that cost about 1% to 1.5% of the building's value, and we would be able to have the building certified as Energy Star. And next slide, let's look at what's the benefit of living in or using a green building. One is a productivity. That means that it's a better space. People tend to be more healthier. And we have research showing that working in a LEED certified building, okay, there are 2.88 days fewer sick days for workers. And from employers' perspective, this is very important. And we have the employees stay in a healthier environment, such that they can come to the office, work 2.88 days more than otherwise would be, and that would be an improvement of the productivity. Next slide. There are also substantial financial benefits that have been reported by research, and that including that the rent premium. That means that holding other factor constant, you'll be able to rent those green certified space at a higher rent. An occupancy premium means that you tend to have a lower vacancy rate when your building is a green building, and so those are the financial benefit, okay, when you have a green building. And we have a similar kind of number for a building that is certified as Energy Star. But the amount of the benefit for Energy Star is much smaller than the LEED certified building. LEED certified building are relatively more costly to achieve, but they give you more financial benefit compared with the Energy Star certified building. Okay, let's stop it here for today. Next time when we come back, let's finish the remaining part of the sustainability. Good, thank you.